Welcome back to another edition of Liberty Coin Services Things You Need to Know series. It's my pleasure here at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas to have as a guest Steve Forbes. I may not need to say any more of an introduction, but if not, and you've heard of Forbes magazine, that's, in my mind, that's virtually one and the same. Former presidential candidate and a guy that writes great columns in his magazine, a lot of them having to do with money or getting rid of government regulation. Welcome, Steve.
Good to be with you, Pat. Thank you for having me on.
Now, in my writings, I am quite pessimistic about the future of the dollar, but from what I gather, you generally are advocating a return to a strong dollar. So I'd like to share a differing opinion with our guests, if you could illuminate them.
Well, I think there's growing recognition that what we've done in recent years is not working, that the U.S. economy still can't get out of second gear, that suppressing interest rates and punishing savers is not a good thing, that the credit markets aren't working, small and new businesses aren't getting reliable lines of money they need to start, grow, and prosper. And in terms of a stable dollar, you don't want a strong dollar, you don't want a weak dollar, just as you don't want a timepiece, a watch, or a clock that is too fast or too slow. You want it just right. And that's what a gold standard is all about, having a fixed value for the dollar. It doesn't restrict the economy, it just makes growth easier because you can focus on doing real productive things instead of worrying about whether your currency is going to be around. And in terms of stabilizing the dollar, basically what it means is fixing the value to gold, let's say $1,200 or $1,100 an ounce, and then gearing monetary policy towards it. It also means as insurance, you remove barriers to alternative currency, so if you feel something's going wrong, we the people can do something about it, and basic things like that, taking away taxes on gold and silver and the like. So they're basic safeguards you can put in, but the key thing is understanding what needs to be done and people who understand how to preserve the system, which we don't have yet today. That's why we wrote the book, to help start the education process.
The book you're referring to is Money, How the Destruction of the Dollar Threatens the Global Economy and What We Can Do About It, that you came out with last year, co-authored with Elizabeth Ames. Now, not everybody holds that kind of thought of the prospect for the dollar. For instance, in an interview that I did with Jim Rogers, he thinks that within a decade the U.S. dollar will have failed, although for the next year or two it will be strong, because it doesn't have much competition now. Although I think the Chinese yuan renminbi will do so eventually. But you're hopeful that the best outcome would be for the dollar to survive.
Well, it's in the hands of we the people and the people we elect. And this is where I think the dollar will be an issue in the presidential election in 2016 and beyond. How do we get interest rates again, so that the credit markets can work? You know, suppressing interest rates is like a form of rent control. Great if you have that rent controlled apartment and it hasn't deteriorated yet, but you're not going to get a lot of apartment building when you have that kind of control. You're not going to get real credit money going to small, even medium-sized businesses. So what the government has done, the Federal Reserve has done, is make it very easy for the government to borrow, very easy for big companies to borrow at cheap rates, subsidized rates. And so you have Apple with $150 billion in cash going out and issuing $40 billion of bonds. Why? Because they could do it and use it to buy in stock and boost the stock. That's not an optimal use of capital. Imagine if that capital had been going to starting new businesses, finding new cures for diseases and the like. So you need a functioning market, banking and everything else, to get these new businesses going. And that's the key. So you have a stable dollar, you can invest in the future. Right now, as you know, investing is always risky. But if you don't know whether you're going to get $10 back in 5 years, that's 50-cent dollar, 20-cent dollar, you don't get as much of an investment. And that's why wages have stagnated, because small and new businesses who create those jobs and are fond of a lot of the innovation we have are being starved.
I have a theory that since I think the biggest beneficiary of zero interest rate policy is the U.S. government, it doesn't have to pay as much interest on its debt and therefore keeps the budget deficit down, that could keep the Federal Reserve from raising interest rates either at all or maybe once, and not doing it very quickly. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of the government, yes, having zero interest rates sounds great, but as we point out in the book, it's like an old saying in the Soviet Union: the healthcare is free, but you can't get any. And that's what we have with small and new businesses today. And in terms of the deficit, yes, the government not only gets low rates, but it gets almost free money. At the end of the year, the Federal Reserve takes the interest that it's earned on its bond portfolio, which is now over $4 trillion, and remits it back to the U.S. Treasury Department. So it'd be as if you had a mortgage that you paid $10,000 on of interest during the year, and at the end of the year, the bank gave you the interest back. You'd say that's a pretty good deal. Yeah. So the government gets a true bargain. The government now last year collected from the Federal Reserve about $90 billion.
Okay. That's nice if you can do it.
Well, it wrecks the economy, but government doesn't mind.
What do you think is happening with China? And in their markets now, they've been quite volatile, mostly negative the last few weeks. And also, a lot of their, in effect, buying up America as a way to disgorge U.S. dollars and Treasury debt.
Well, China knows that the government leaders know that they have to make reforms, especially in their capital markets, if they want the yuan to be a major global currency. You can't have backwards capital markets or primitive capital markets in a true global currency. It just doesn't work. So, but on the other hand, they haven't grasped that markets go up and down. So on one hand, they want to suppress the stock market from falling, and on the other hand, they want to have sophisticated markets. So they're going to have that tension ongoing. As for their buying our treasuries, I'm delighted, because what it means is if we ever got in a confrontation with China, we can call them up and say, those bonds you have, they make great wallpaper, don't you think?
Apart from treasuries, what about the properties? They're buying land and homes and things.
Well,
I didn't know that they were allowed to in America.
And in terms of Chinese entities buying assets here, again, if they buy a hotel, they're not going to take the hotel and move it to Beijing. So again, if you get in a confrontation, guess who ends up with the asset?
Yeah, if goods don't cross borders or trade doesn't cross borders, then soldiers will.
Yeah.
What do you think of the current gold market, where it's been down a good percentage since almost 4 years ago now? Do you have any thoughts on, is it a bargain time to buy or not? Or
timing, trying to time commodities is a treacherous thing, especially if you're doing it on margin. In terms of gold, principal reason gold is under pressure is because the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and other central banks have, in the name of inflating, have been deflating. By having government regulations make it very difficult for banks to lend, those extra reserves they've created don't get put to work. So
they just sit on their balance sheet.
It just sits there because they won't allow it to be put to work. And if a bank makes a loan now, they have to go through all sorts of paperwork to demonstrate to the regulators that they're prudent, not taking excessive risks, so it inhibits things. So in the name of helping the economy, as government so often does, it hurts the economy.
Yes. This gets a little to the side of talking about financial matters directly, but you've written some about healthcare in the United States, and you're not exactly in agreement with the current administration.
Well, what the current administration has done, I don't think they realize it, is by putting in this horrific system, is they're now making it possible for a new system to emerge where more and more control will be in the hands of patients. Even before Obamacare, the real customer in the system was not we the patients, it was third parties. And that's why when you go to the hospital, instead of getting a nice robe, you get these gowns that look like they've been washed 5,000 times. You can't tie it in the back and stuff like that. That's not geared to the customer, the patient. So what Obamacare is imploding. A new system is beginning to emerge where the first time we're going to get real free markets, more free markets in healthcare than we've had before, which again will turn a liability into an asset and to a growth industry. Ask ourselves, why is demand for healthcare considered a disaster, whereas demand for anything else in the economy is seen as a great opportunity? If people want more gambling, Las Vegas will be glad to help you out. If you want more cars, Detroit and other manufacturers glad to be of assistance to you. So much with healthcare. We don't have real free markets, but we will. They will emerge. Just don't get sick for the next 3 or 4 years.
I've never thought of it that way. I appreciate that tip. That means what? Sell the insurance company stock you're holding?
Just be careful, because this thing's going to be very fluid and it's going to go in unexpected ways. This system is not going to last.
Okay. Earlier this year, you announced the sale of your company to was it an Eastern or an Asian
group of investors in Hong Kong and Singapore. Yeah.
Okay. Are you being forced to hang around, or are you part of the package?
Well, we have an equity stake, and they're more interested in going in things like real estate than in media. So far, so good.
I think our listeners have gotten some great insights. Obviously, if they want to know your current thoughts, all they have to do is pick up the next issue of Forbes
and go on Forbes.com.
Yes, you've had phenomenal growth in readership, both in print and online. I think when a recent column, Rich Karlgaard said more than 50% of your readers now access from a cell phone or tablet rather than a desktop or laptop computer.
That's right. What we call mobile devices is over half of our traffic comes from that now, and 5 years ago was just about 1%.
And you've got to be among the leaders of publications going in that direction, or at least mass market publications.
We think we've led the field, but in this environment, you can never rest for a second. As my father liked to say, if you think you've arrived, you're ready to be shown the door.
Yeah.
And or as Peter Drucker said, you can eat well or sleep well, but not both.
That's good advice. Well, you've been listening to Steve Forbes of Forbes Magazine. My name's Patrick Heller, the host of Liberty Coin Services' Things You Need to Know from Las Vegas at the Freedom Fest. Goodbye.